Morning, friends. Welcome to the First City Legal in Perth. My name's Peter Wrench, and whether you're here in person or you're joining us online, a great welcome to you. We've got people joining us from across the country this morning, so hello to you. City Legal is a community that exists to consider the bigger questions of life with suits and city workers in cities right around Australia, and we do that by looking at the Bible together. And the format is a short talk followed by Q&A, and the Q&A is my favourite part of it. You get to engage three ways, so you get to cross-examine, politely ask our speaker questions, and you can do that live in person, or you can go old school and on the pieces of paper in front of you, you can write a question that'll be collected later, or you can text it to the number there, and it appears on the screen as well. So the phone number there, you can text at any time the hardest question you can possibly think of. Now, when I was 16, I was surfing with a friend at sunset, and it was obviously a mistake. I was sitting out there at the back, and I suddenly kind of lurched forward, and I thought, this is bizarre, because, the waves bring you in, not out. And then my friend and I started talking about Jaws, which, again, wasn't smart. But then about a few minutes later, after we caught a couple of waves, there was this massive black shark's fin right next to us. So we completely freaked out. I got a wave in, but my friend stacked it and ended up like up to his neck in white water. Anyway, he eventually got to the beach as well. But when I looked at the back of my board, there were teeth marks. So I don't know if you saw the story about Mick Fanning a number of years ago in South Africa, but I think that was a very close call. Now, I tell you that story, right, not to compare lawyers and sharks. I mean, why would I do that? I'm a lawyer, so I wouldn't want to be rude, but actually to draw a comparison between lawyers and surfers. You see, because surfers are not much into self-expression. You can have a different board, a different wetsuit maybe, but that were pretty much the same. And I felt that was the same way with lawyers. I mean, in Sydney, we have a split profession. So if you're a silk, you might have a longer wig, or you might have your kind of initials emblazoned in a certain font on your bag, taking your books to court, right? But that's about it. But our speaker today, Steve McAlpine, is talking about self-denial in the age of self-expression. And he thinks he's got a couple of things to say to us lawyers. So, Steve, why don't you come up? Please welcome him. I think he's just putting an extra order for another macchiato.
No,
is that all right? No? Steve, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much. Now, you're a journalist. We're lawyers. Should we be nervous?
Should you be? No, I should be nervous.
Or you should be nervous.
I don't wear a suit very often.
So that makes you feel nervous, does it?
Already being in the city wearing a suit makes me feel like an imposter syndrome. So you've got it all over me.
Okay, all right. Now, second question, you said that you oversubscribe to newspapers.
Yeah, I do.
Give us the list, and what is your most, you're ex-journalist, what is your most trusted source of information?
Oh, right. Well, it might not be a newspaper, it might be the Bible. So I should say that.
Yes,
it's true for all matters of life and faith. Newspapers, I get this, well, the Australian Sydney Morning Herald for my sins, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times and the Times. Because I want to know, know thy enemy, but I won't tell you which side of that.
Okay, so you're not going to tell us what you're afraid. Okay, maybe that can be a question later. What is the most trusted source of information?
Yeah.
Now, Steve, you're going to speak for us in a moment, but you've actually asked that a passage from a biography written about Jesus be read for us.
Yeah.
And you can actually find that passage printed on the outlines there, or it's posted in the chat, or there's a link there. So open that up, and Lainey from the Perth City Bible Forum team is going to come and read that before you speak to us. Is that all right? That's it. Thanks, Lainey. There you go.
Okay, so the reading's there in your handout. Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God."
Thanks, Lainey. It seems like I've been speaking on a variation of a theme around those words of Jesus the last few months, but I want to start somewhere else. If you could turn back time, where would you turn it back to? I think at the moment I'd probably turn it back to Monday morning this week at about 7:30 in the morning, because at about 8 o'clock in the morning, I got up, and we have a lot of houseplants, and you rack up a price when you buy houseplants. You don't realise to replace those houseplants would cost a lot of money. And on Monday morning, I thought it's time to water the plants, not overwater them, not underwater them, just Goldilocks them just right. And I'll feed them at the same time. And I fed all the plants, and I watered all the plants, and I looked at the bottle that I had fed them with, and it didn't say feed. What did it say? It said weed. So I glyphosated every plant in the house. Now, there's a couple of things you can do there. Is one, you can not tell your wife and just say, I was away all week last week in Sydney, and I come back and the house plants are dying. And that would have had to play out for a long period of time. Or you can go into the witness relocation program. That's the other option. But there's a verse in the Bible where King David, the king, did something terrible, and the last verse, he gets away with it, except the last verse of that chapter says, the thing that David did displeased the Lord. So I figured someone may know what I'm doing. But it was interesting that as I looked at that, how did I think that I was doing the plants good when I was actually killing them? What I ended up doing was washing every plant down, going and buying 20 bags of potting mix at Bunnings and spending half the day repotting them, and see how we go. But what I thought was feeding my plants, enabling them to flourish, was actually doing the exact opposite to the plants, to what I intended, and it would result in their fading and failure. So I'd mistakenly fed poison into the very root system, and in the end, I just decided it's impossible to flush it out. I can't let it coexist with the plants, and I'd mistakenly done what was the opposite of what I intended to do. And glyphosate is residual. It will continue to kill over time. And what I literally needed was root and branch transformation. I needed to do something radical to change it. And as I thought about it, that would be my coffee, but that's okay. If we put it there, that's fine. Thanks very much. In one sense, Jill, my wife, said, you're going to write about this at some stage, aren't you? But it's got so many applications. But I think in one sense, it's a great metaphor of what we perhaps do with ourselves, perhaps individually, but certainly as a society, and Western society in particular. Imagine if we took a product that we thought was enabling us to flourish, but was actually doing the exact opposite to that. A product that was something we said will enable us to grow was actually withering us. And can I suggest that's exactly what we're doing? If I'm thinking about how Western frameworks are going at the moment, it's almost like we're putting a social, spiritual glyphosate on our plants, on ourselves, thinking that we're helping ourselves to flourish when we're doing the opposite. And the title of this talk was Self-Denial in an Age of Self-Expression. And the Western world is an age of self-expression. You do you. You do who you think you are in order to create the most authentic self you are. And that is presented to us as a society and as a culture as the way to flourish. That if each of us does who we think we are, we will actually flourish together. But I think it's an honest mistake. I think it's born from a desire to see humans flourish, but it's a mistake nonetheless. And as I've looked at it, I think that hard drive for self-expression is creating a residual problem in our culture that is resulting in us fading rather than flourishing as a culture. Because the really interesting thing is that the self-expressive self-individualism framework that we live in, that push for the self-authentic program that drives our Western culture, is resulting, or at least correlating, with a deep anxiety in our culture. It's interesting, isn't it, that the push to do you is resulting in people who are very anxious. This is an anxious age. One of the reasons it's an anxious age is that if you are told you do you, you're responsible for your own authenticity program. When it fails and you end up washed up by it, the only person to blame is you. And so my wife is a clinical psychologist, and you can say what you like about the search for self-authenticity in our culture, but it's doing us very well. She's booked out because of that. I guess I would call it spiritual glyphosate that we're putting into our system. And I think we live under the false assumption that the true path to human flourishing is individual self-expression. We're committed as a society to a program of feeding us root and branch with that from a very early age. And it simply assumes that our human flourishing will be realized when you jettison what everyone else thinks you should be or do, when you say that community is not the center of who we're supposed to be, but the individual is. And it's residual. I think the Western setting is going to take some time to launder this out. The thing is, you'll be culturally rewarded for it. Our culture itself allows extreme expressive individualism to drive itself. Now, it's interesting, for my sins, my daughter has had a tally on with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, right? How much time and effort's gone into that compared to the Ukraine situation in their house, I'm not sure. But there was a lot of trolling of Amber Heard, and as an article said, why did the internet turn on her? And it's really interesting. It was a pretty sordid affair, really, wasn't it? It was like everything was out there. And I don't know what happened to Johnny Depp. He got very old looking and looks like, the manager of a seedy bar now. But it just was very sordid, between a very sordid kind of relationship, to be honest. But the end of this article in the Guardian newspaper said, actually, Amber Heard, her main problem, and it listed all the things that she'd done, which looked pretty dubious in the whole situation. Her main problem was that people didn't like her because she was being authentic. She gets a hall pass because she was being authentic, and that was okay. And why should we have a problem with that? Wow, that seems to be a very easy lever to pull in our current age, that whatever I do, as long as I can say I'm being authentic, I can pull that lever. Philip Schofield, who is an ITV television star in the UK on the This Morning program, leaves his wife and daughters because he says he's come out and he's leaving and that's it. And the key issue was that he was being celebrated after that for being authentic, that he's his true self now. And that's an interesting take, isn't it? So instead of saying authenticity in the past may have been, here's my family, I love them, I nurture them, I look after them, and I put my own interests subsumed to that. Let's be authentic and self-express. And you'll get plenty of points for that. And on a more mundane point, I suppose, a running friend of mine who was running with me as a triathlete, used to run every week with us and suddenly just disappeared off the map. And I thought, I wonder what happened to him. And then it popped up on Facebook the other day. Oh, wow, he did leave his wife and kids and go off with someone else. And he wrote this even yesterday on Facebook. 4 years ago today, I had the unexpected privilege to meet someone that went on to play such a key part in what I knew was the right way to go. That's the search for self-expressive authenticity. And everyone rewards that, according to the likes on a page. Now, it's not all negative in that sense. Self-expression exhibits itself in many positive ways and that we think will lead to our flourishing. But my concern is that generally as a society, we've unwittingly spraying ourselves with spiritual glyphosate. As I look around the results of the culture, I don't see flourishing. I see a lot of withering going on, a lot of fading. And that anxiety issue that I talked about certainly doesn't look like it. But it's interesting that the words of Jesus in this passage in Luke 9 kind of confront that whole idea of self-expression. When Jesus himself says, whoever wants to be my disciple, they must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Now, I think Christianity's got a lot of problems in the cultural framework at the moment. It's kind of on the nose. And for some people that are saying, well, if we could just jettison the ideas that Christianity has given us, it would be better for the sake of society. But there are some things in this passage that Jesus says which challenge this self-expression idea, but also give us hope that we can actually flourish as human beings in the long run. See, the gospel of Jesus, when he says these things, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, is a direct challenge to the self-expression age. Self-denial in a self-expression age. Does anyone want to sign up? You kind of feel if you want to show someone what Christianity is about, you want this to be 8-point italic light. You don't want a passage like this to be up front and center of what the Bible's saying. But what if the gospel message of Jesus is not just, it's not a software solution to what's going on in our culture, but it's a hardware solution? Because it's a bit like my plants. You read verses like that and it's saying, you can't just tidy up the problem you've created. You've got to go and buy 10 bags of potting mix at Bunnings and strip it all away and start something again, because self-denial just cannot coexist with the full-blown cultural self-expression moment. So you read those words, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. The first challenge is that Jesus doesn't say, must just take up a cross and be different. He puts himself front and center of the project. He's, in one sense, it's kind of, you want me to follow you. If someone said to me, in order to find your life, come and follow me, I'd think they're a bit of a narcissist, and plenty of narcissists around. But Jesus says it in such a way that 2,000 years later, people still do that. And he says, deny yourself and lose your life, but lose it for me. But you know, there's a great trade-off in this as well. He says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. It's not as if Jesus says stoicism is the future. He's not saying, well, there's self-expression or there's sort of grumpy stoicism. He's giving them a fantastic transaction here. You can gain everything and save your life if you give it up. There's a deep paradox going on in this passage. In a sense, it's the equal and opposite of my glyphosate problem. Feed death and you get life, he's saying. Feed loss and you get gain. It's a complete paradox to what the culture thinks. Because we're saying, as I'm saying as a Christian person, Jesus is saying at this point, the key to true human flourishing into eternity, into the long picture, is the exact opposite of what the culture is saying. Lose the self-expression and you will gain life forever, he's saying. It's a risk, but it's a great trade-off. And it's an outrageous claim that Jesus says self-expression will not lead to your fulfilment, but self-denial will. Now, the Bible is not about making life terrible. This is actually Jesus saying this is the key to what can make life good now as well. There's something in what he says. Now let's go back to the idea of plants. Think back to the Garden of Eden story. If you think back to the Garden of Eden, it was plants everywhere, right? It made my house plants look pretty anemic. But God in the garden was not churlish and mean-spirited in the Garden of Eden with the first humans. He said, have fun. Every plant except one. Every plant except one. There were 1 million yeses and only one no. And that feels like a huge, freedom that our culture now doesn't even understand. But how did humans respond to the 1 million yeses and the one no? Well, they looked at the one no and said, what about my self-expression program? What about my self-expression program? And so in the garden, in the story in Genesis, where Adam and Eve, the first humans, take the fruit they're not permitted to take, they go down the self-expression program and end up with death. That's the point of the story of the Bible. And Jesus comes in here and says, I want to flip that. I want to reverse that. I want to show you how you can choose to give up your life and gain life. It's a reversal of that first story. And as you read through the story of the Bible in Genesis, the trickle of self-expression rises to a flood, and it's glyphosate all the way down. It only takes one generation in that story for humans to self-express at the cost of another human's life. as the story of Cain killing his brother Abel. So that's the framework I think that we're living in as we look at these verses. This is why these verses are such a challenge to me individually, because I want to self-express, and to us as a society. And I'm saying these things for two reasons, because we swim in the self-expression water. We just do. No matter what we think, we swim in it. But the desire for self-expression is the path to true freedom. It's not new, and it will always come at a cost. Always come at a cost. And as we look at our society, there is personal, societal, relational, and spiritual cost to unfettered self-expression. The glyphosate has trickled all the way into the roots of our system, and it's residual in our culture. The Bible says there's a way that seems right to a person, but the end is death. And it's critical to realize that the self-expression framework that we have in our current culture doesn't seem always to have death in it now. It looks like you pull the lever and it works pretty well. But the end, it says, is death. The current climate may look as if it's flourishing now, but glyphosate gets to the roots eventually and kills things. We're simply mistaking the weed for the feed. The challenge to us, I think, is this. Perth is a very easy place to be rewarded for self-expression. We live in a very open culture where you can pretty much do what you want, and it rewards us for doing so. And there's little risk to the more extreme versions of self-expression as well, breaking long-held relationships, for example. And religion is seen as an anchor, dragging us down, stopping us from being our authentic selves in Perth, in Western Australia, in the Western world. And perhaps, though, you've been killed off by someone else's self-expressive toxic glyphosate. The body count from the self-expression program that is hailed and congratulated by others may have left you bereft. There's always a cost to someone, somewhere. And Jesus' answer to that is say no to the tree of death and the self-expression, and say yes to the tree of life. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Verse 25, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit the very self? It's a fantastic transaction. Jesus isn't offering us nothing. He's offering us everything, just not now. Just not now. And that's a very hard thing it's hard to reject the not now, the now for the sake of the not now. But Jesus is offering us a great transaction. In fact, his own demonstration of self-denial leads him to a cross. The tree, as it's often referred to. It's commonly called a tree, a crucifixion. And it's a deep paradox where on the cross, the tree, Jesus deals with the root and branch poison of that self-expressive program. And he gives us the opportunity to have life and to flourish. And he does so in a way that, quite frankly, I don't see in the rest of our society. The self-expression model has thrown up a body count. We've got a system where everyone is afraid of getting something wrong because they'll be cancelled forever by someone else. It's a scary time in the Western world because the self-expression project isn't working. We're happily spraying glyphosate because we think it's going to solve our problem, and all we're doing is killing the roots of our system. I don't think Jesus comes to this. There's no point in history where what Jesus says is actually anything but absolutely threatening. His disciples weren't going, that's a nice idea. Why don't I just self-deny for a while? And 2,000 years later, everyone will be into self, this will be shocking, but, in Jesus' time, it's totally shocking. Everywhere Jesus comes, he shocks people with this statement. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. It's an amazing transaction, isn't it? An amazing transaction that if you give up, you gain. And it might require radical surgery for you. It might require the spiritual equivalent of going to Bunnings and buying 10 bags of potting mix and stripping off the plants and saying, I've got to start something again. Because glyphosate can't coexist with a healthy system of a plant. Something radical has to change. I want to leave it at that. And I'll go back and check my plants when I go home, because I've been getting up every morning nervously to see how they go. But it does show you that this self-expression and self-denial cannot coexist. Jesus says they can't. Yet the irony is, to give it up makes you flourish in a way that you could never understand or truly even believe is possible. And that's the promise of Jesus. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks very much, Steve. Well, we've got some time for questions, and there's some fantastic questions that have already come through in the text. So just a reminder, there's 3 ways you can engage. You can just jot a question down on the piece of paper there if you're here in person, and Laney will come around and pick it up, or you can text it to the numbers on the chat, or you can ask a question live. So how about, is there any brave soul who wants to ask a question live? There's a mic here, and although Rob's got a mic, I think, at the back. Oh, there it is, it's at the back. So just summon up your courage, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, first question. First question is about your oversubscription to newspapers.
All right, yeah.
It wasn't which one do you prefer, but do you see any articles that raise concern about the trajectory of self-expression?
Oh, all the time. What I find really interesting is some of the faith-based ideas in the last 20 years, which are often poo-pooed by secular framework, are now, hey, that might work. Just reading on the train in the way here, Wall Street Journal article that said couples that don't cohabit and marry in their early 20s have a better chance of staying together as couples and are happier in their marriage than couples who do what conventional wisdom says, wait till you're 30, cohabit a few times just to find the right person. And lo and behold, that isn't working as well as the other framework. And I'm not saying that everyone should get married in their early 20s, but I'm just saying the self-expressive thing is do these things because they're wise, yet statistically they don't prove to be that. I also think that that whole anxiety issue in our culture, a lot of that is driven from, and my wife would say this, that one of the client groups she sees most in her practice are young women in their early 20s who went to very well-heeled schools and were told they could be anything they wanted to be. And at 21, when that lever is broken off in their hands, they're coming to see her saying, this isn't quite working the way I thought it would. Something is not right. And there's that level of expectation that I can carve out whoever I want to be. You can be who you want to be. And when that breaks, you go, you've only got yourself to blame. So there's a lot of anxiety in that cohort, I think. And that's just a wisdom issue.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. We've got a question here about the desire for self-expression. Why do you think there is that innate desire for self-expression? And how has it come to be that our culture thinks it's the key to flourishing? Like the key?
Well, I don't think it's just the culture that thinks that. I swim in that, right? I got, a couple of $1,000s worth of houseplants because I like to carve out my house to look like, something from Southern California in 1950. And I like, it's the stuff we swim in. My default in the morning is self-expression, right? So I don't think self-expression is a particularly modern thing. We've just baptized it with a very modern, you're okay. In other cultures even now, to self-express in sub-Saharan Africa, people would look at you a little oddly, like, I'm just going to carve my own life out apart from the community. It doesn't work that way. So I think there's something going on that's deeper. There's an anxiety that the search for true authenticity is now focused on the individual, and not just the individual, the psychological self of the individual. Who I am is who I am psychologically in our cultural framework. And unless I can sort that out, I'm not truly being authentic and flourishing. And the problem is that shifts. You know what your own psychological self is like Monday to Friday. See, Monday was witness relocation program. I'm in despair. Thursday, I feel okay. But that's so changeable. And I think that shift to the inner self, trying to identify who we are outside of any locus outside of ourselves. So there's a loss of transcendence, that there's something bigger than us. That's part of the issue.
Okay, we've got another question here that follows on, but just before, there's a question from the back. Yes.
Yes.
So as a journalist, what role does media play in this? Because it seems to be the big echo chamber, and this seems to then feed into our politics and what's happening in our politics with independence and so on, hitting as a rise of the, I'm different, pick me.
I went through university in the 1980s and did a journalism and literature degree. And I thought, these ideas are crazy. They'll never fly in the public square. Yet here we are, right? So politics is downstream of culture. And the people who create the narratives and write the stories of our culture aren't in politics. They're further upstream in our creative industries and our writers and our thinkers and our poets. And those ideas filter. So politics can get voted out of office, culture can't. And it's just, and it's not that everything in politics and the professions of journalism has fully bought into this, but the cultural story is deeply philosophically shaped towards that expressive individualism. And you don't have to be a philosopher to know it. You just have to sing a Disney song, which tells you to look into your heart. That's where your true authenticity is. Now, the flip side of that is the biblical Christian framework and worldview is, if you look into your heart, you won't like what you see because it's deceptive. But if you say that's not true, how about we say that the heart is the place where your true self is discovered and you know yourself? That changes the nature of our relationship to ourselves and gives us a sense of false confidence that the decisions we make will actually work out for the good. Hey, you're lawyers, you tell me.
They're busy.
They're busy. As busy as psychologists, I'll predict.
Okay. All right.
Any
other
sense.
questions from the floor? Any other paper questions coming on? No questions?
Or observations.
Okay.
Or
observations.
hints on how to make my plants stay alive would be
What
great.
if someone wants to get up and quote some poetry? Is that all right?
Who wants to get up?
Someone might want to. Is that okay? Okay, I've got a question here. It all sounds very grand, a root and branch transformation. But what do I do on Monday morning with my hectic schedule?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I've worked in church for a long time, but one of the concerns that many people who don't work in church have is that people in church who are working in church are preparing their congregation for the week they think they're having, not the week they're having. So you're not
Just
getting...
say that bit again.
Yeah, well, you're not getting
I haven't
up...
had a coffee yet. So.
Yeah, you're not getting up on Monday morning thinking about church. You're thinking about, I've got to navigate the office. So the role of church should be to equip you from Monday to Friday to live in such a way that it makes a difference to you and to those you work with. There's a new book called out by Mark Sayers called A Non-Anxious Presence, talking about Christian leadership in what he calls the grey zone of the cultural change we're going through. And Edwin Friedman was a family systems therapist who said that the person most likely to shape a culture isn't the person with their name on the door that says CEO or principal lawyer or whatever. It's the non-anxious presence. The person in that setting who people go, they're the person that's trustworthy on this floor. They're the person that doesn't gossip. They're the person that if I had a problem, I could come to. And if I had they'll never take credit for something they've not done, and they'll never blame shift. And I think as people going into a workspace in an anxious culture, to be the non-anxious presence carries a moral authority well beyond what you would even imagine. And you may not even pick it. Someone might have to come up to you and say, I've noticed that you don't buy into that way of behaving, or I've got a problem here, but I couldn't tell anyone else, but I think I could tell you. That's how we shift from being self-expressive to saying, how do I serve here for the sake of other people's flourishing, not just my own? Look, the cities are dog-eat-dog worlds, aren't they? That's just the way it is. But to be the opposite of that is counterintuitive, but I think it's the future.
Okay. Now, talking about not being anxious, we're getting close to time, so we're going to call it a day there. But please join me in thanking Steve for coming on this morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, for not just coming along, Steve, but answering and giving us such wisdom, and also wearing a suit for us. It's very, very kind of you. I'm sure Steve will be around for a few minutes after this if you've got a question you'd like to ask him. Look, the only way to find out about future city legal events is to get in touch with us. And let me show you how you do that. If you take the form here, and there's a QR code in the back of it, everyone can just take their phones out, please, and just scan that. And if you're online, there's a URL which takes you to that same link. If you just scan that, and you can, if you just tick there that I'd like to find out about future city legal events, we can get in touch with you. You'll notice as you're doing that one of the options is a hope group. Now let me explain about hope groups. Hope groups have taken off, particularly during lockdown over the last 18 months or so. There's about 19 groups started with lawyers right around Australia. So we have groups started in Adelaide, in Melbourne, Canberra, Parramatta, Sydney, and there's been one in Perth. How long has it been going for, Simon? A little while. 5 months, something like that. Okay, so there's one here in Perth. And what are these groups? It's just very small groups, maybe 3 or 4 getting together before work or at lunchtime, either online or in person, and just a chance to pause, perhaps be thankful, and to read one of the stories of hope that Jesus told, and to think about how you can reach out. So if you're interested in finding out more, or would like to join one of those little groups, and maybe one of the ones in Perth, then just fill in that feedback form. There's also a paper version of the feedback form that you can see there. Let me see that one there, so you can fill that in as well. The last thing I wanted to draw your attention to is this brochure here. This is our City Legal first ever national conference. It's in Canberra, 22nd and 23rd of September, so towards the end of the year. We've got some fantastic speakers, David Robertson, Dan Anderson from the Lachlan Macquarie Institute, and John Bales are our keynote speakers. And we've got Perth's very own John Steenhoff. So if you notice the bottom right-hand corner, there are CPD points on offer too. Okay, so we've checked with the Law Society of Western Australia. So there's some points there, and John's doing one of our seminars. So it's a fantastic time. I mean, it would be a long road trip. It would be kind of a dream road trip from here. But look, why not push one of your cases up to the High Court, or apply for special leave, or just go there on a whim? Why not catch up with someone? It'd be great fun. It'd be great to have you there. And I'll leave that with you. So look, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Thank you.